Okay, so everyone, welcome to Battery Talk. This is the Who's Doing It Right, Cool Science Part 2, and we're going to be going over form energy and our next energy. In our previous section on Cool Science, we went over two electrolyte companies with very different approaches. South 8 for their liquid, their gas electrolyte, and then Amsera for their many solid state electrolytes. Okay, I kind of already gave this this intro, but I'm going to do it again real quick. You know, I already gave this intro. We're going to just move to the next part.
Which we already gave.
which we already gave.
Yep.
These will all be on the slides, and so I'm not going to bore you all with Jeff and I's background, but these slides will be available on the LinkedIn page for this presentation. And again, all of our previous presentations are now up there, and so we're just really excited to kind of share this with everyone outside of the battery community as well. You want to take this one, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. So so one of the things we wanted to do is enable the community to just have visibility into the job market and what's going on. So we do post resource lists or job listings every month for everybody to see. Some of the data may not be accurate. We do this somewhat manually every brunch, which is pretty time intensive. But the goal is just to give people the option to say, hey, what's out there and what state it is in. So we do it by job title, company, state, and city. So if you're looking for a specific area, you can find it there, hopefully.
Okay, so this is our grading scheme. It's a little bit cleaned up, but basically what we do is we go over companies in a couple different categories: how they are surviving the valley of death, how they're engineering into the box, their technology matching, their pain points, and do we like them, and grade them between sort of a 0 and a 5. 2.5 is actually like average, neutral, okay. That's our metric here. It's not like college grading where if you don't have a 90%, it's bad. So keep that in mind. 2.5 is like average, neutral. Higher than that is good. Lower than that is bad. So the first thing we look at is surviving valley of death. And basically, most of you are probably familiar with this concept. Basically, it's the cumulative profit and loss a company has as they go from, you know, tiny company and R&D with a concept through actually fleshing out the technology, through pilot demonstration, through setting up their manufacturing line to first product launch. And at that point, they're down here at the sort of the bottom of the valley of death. And then they have to ship the product at a profit to many, many people over time to make enough money to build their way back up and actually become sort of successful as a company, have their first successful, you know, market launch, and then their first business success. And then from there, you know, it's a wild ride as they have to then do it again and again and again until eventually they get sort of long-term profit and success as a business. And hopefully nobody, you know, no new technology replaces you, which is very pertinent in the battery field.
Yeah, you don't want to get caught up on. Engineering into the box is actually where we start to look at what is this new technology, or what is this company doing differently? Does it exist, or will it port into the pre-existing infrastructure that is in place? A great example of this is when you see a lot of companies do specialty coatings or specialty materials that require some level of special customization. A great example of this, honestly, is solid state companies. The manufacturing and the process for sintering solid state materials onto whatever electrode of their choice or separator doesn't exist. So not only do they have the challenge of tackling the science that is making a good solid state material and enabling that, they also have the challenge of just moving it up.
Okay.
And similarly, yeah, I'll take it. Similarly, Painpoints is just a future look of, have they figured it out? Can they engineer into the box? And then are they going to suffer when they scale, right? I think we can all agree here, doing something on 100 milligram level is incredibly easy. Doing that exact same thing over and over and over again to like a 6 sigma tolerance at the metric ton level is exceedingly challenging. And not only does it come with hurdles in terms of how you produce it, it also comes with hurdles in terms of cost or supply line, or just where your resources are. A great example of this is the US. There's a lot of lithium metal battery companies. If all those lithium metal battery companies were going to meet their claims and turn on gigawatt hours of factories, there is currently not enough lithium suppliers in the United States to support all those companies, let alone a 1 gigawatt hour recyclable or 1 gigawatt hour production facility. So there's just not even enough lithium. So if you have a lithium metal battery, their pain point is going to be the moment they try to even get to gigawatt hour, they already need to have found suppliers. So if they don't, then they're just stuck.
Mm-hmm. And remember, everyone, working in batteries has the complexity of semiconductors, the throughput requirements of paper, and you have to pay for it all with the 0% margins of solar. So, good luck. We all chose the right industry to be in. So this is one of the things that Jeff and I sort of harp on a lot, which is basically actually matching your technology to market. And the principal point here is that batteries fundamentally are about choices. And as you make different choices on the form factor, the chemistry, the other components, the loadings, pretty much every single decision you make, you're actually steering towards a different performance, which goes to a different market. And so there is no such thing as one battery that hits every market, despite all the, as Catherine will know, all the wonderful TAM diagrams that the investor pitch decks have. That's not how it works. You need a very specific tailored battery for every single application. The battery in a Tesla is very, very different than the battery in a soldier's remote backup communication system that's being carried in the desert, for example. Same thing with what's in your electronic device like your phone versus what's in a drone. The rate requirements, the energy storage requirements, the safety requirements, the cost requirements are all very different. And you really need to correctly match what you're doing and how much it costs you and the performance benefits you get to the target application if you want to be successful.
Yeah, and then as far as do we like them, this is probably our most subjective section. We come in, we do a lot of analytical work on all of these companies. We do a lot of reading. We try to suss out what the issues are going to be with the company. But, the reality is that we also wanted to have a fun section where we can, make little jokes here and there, like, oh man, they put like Panasonic 18650s on their cycling graph as a comparison at like 180 watt hours per kg, but like in reality, those are like 270 right now. So like it's a really terrible comparison. Or like, are they producing reproducible data sets? So this one's really for the subjective fun, but also the give some of the adjacent industries that ability to see what other battery engineers really try to pick out from different like companies in terms of like what we want to see off their decks, right? Nobody wants to see a battery engineer never wants to see a single line of performance. They want to see every cell that they tested for infinity on that and see the spread. So you'll get a little bit of insights into how we subjectively look at them from our technical point of view.
Mm-hmm. The other thing we tend to do with this is it's a nice way for us to also kind of show what is publicly available. And so we also kind of give all of these a grade based on, not just yes or no, but like maybe we don't know or it's not applicable. And so for some of these things, the companies, like actually for one or two of the ones today, there's just no cell data available because they haven't published any. And so when we look at these things, we can't say, well, no, they don't have it. We have to say, we don't know, or maybe. Anyway.
I mean, if you work at those companies, feel free to send that data our way. We will happily update any of these metrics or your score. We are not above being wrong. So,
and we've actually done that before. I think Ronnie's probably not still here, but Ronnie Tao from Amprius saw us give a presentation on Amprius back in like July of last year or maybe October of last year, and ended up basically pinging us and going, hey, we've got a whole bunch of new public information that we're about to publish. Can you please review it in advance and then go fix your score? And we're happy to do that when people send us more information. It's just, we do these with what we have access to publicly. Jeff and I also both have access to a lot of private information, but we can't disclose those or use those in our presentations.
Yeah.
Okay.
As much as I wish.
We would get in a lot of trouble. Anyways, so the two companies today that we're going to be going over are Form Energy and Our Next Energy. So Form Energy is an iron air storage battery company, and they have their specific technology is they have iron rust air batteries that go back and forth between iron and rust in the charge and discharge state. Their pitch is that basically they're using abundant, cheap materials that can be used for mass production at grid scale at low cost. And that's their kind of company entire focus is just that. And their technology kind of ranges from packaging to flow systems to the way that they're positioning the iron and also the electrolytes. That's kind of the main thing that they focus on.
Yeah, and then the second one, Our Next Energy, is what we call a hybrid composite pack. So it's we talk about cells specifically. In this one, we're really focusing on the pack. Their big claim to sort of like our technical pitch advantage really is that by going to a hybrid design, which Obear and I have talked about in the past, is something we would love to see. You can start using different cells with very different purposes. And this kind of relates to that matching technology to market, right? They can leverage high power cells, but also leverage those high energy cells in kind of a tandem relationship, similar to how you see a lot of grid storage being handled. So we thought these went well together. As far as you might have seen them though, but they did the whole like Tesla goes 700 miles thing where they took a Tesla and then completely put one of their battery packs inside of it. So it was pretty cool.
Okay, so we're going to start off with Form Energy and look at how they're surviving the Valley of Death. Overall, it looks like pretty good. They're basically at the bottom of the valley right now from that pictograph and about to start hopefully working their way back up. They just took a very big round back in August of last year of $240 million to essentially set up their, sort of pilot to manufacturing line and start shipping product. So from a funding perspective, they're doing pretty well and they're kind of accelerating. They've got a couple key investors and their business plan is to basically develop, manufacture, and sell batteries for grid storage to enable renewable energy at a grid, at a large consumer, large company, sort of block scale, not house scale, and for grid. Their value proposition really is that their battery chemistry is safe as compared to lithium ion because they're not using flammable electrolytes. It's much cheaper because iron, air, and the packaging material is much cheaper than typically the components that go into other battery technologies. And it's also highly abundant. So it's one of the things that can be scaled very, very nicely, because iron, water, and air are pretty cheap.
Yeah, I mean,
especially, go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the things you guys have to understand too is from a value proposition point of view, the reason cheap comes into, you'll see cheap thrown around a lot in the flow battery industry, but the vanadium is not cheap. So it may have like sort of a relative cheapness to if you made an entire array of NMC 811 batteries, which are going at an extreme premium. But the reality is the input materials themselves for some of these flow batteries are not cheap at all. So iron is by far one of the cheapest, and it would be a pure iron battery. So you're looking at like the way the flow batteries work, just a quick overview, is it's change in the valence states of the active material. So you would have essentially an Fe3 plus active material, and one electrolyte would go down to Fe2 plus an electron as it reacts against the electrode on the other side.
Yeah. One thing just to comment here as well is I'm sure everyone has seen that the nickel prices have skyrocketed and the cobalt prices have skyrocketed. And now that everyone has announced they're going to LFP, all the precursors for LFP have skyrocketed. And so those are all things that have a much more limited production base. And so the more people that pivot to those technologies, the higher the costs go, the harder it becomes for people to actually produce at a gigascale when they can't get the supply. That's not true of any of these things. There is enough iron production today. It might cost a little bit more as you scale, but there's enough iron production today to outfit everything. So that's one of the things that's actually very nice about their proposition. The other thing we typically look at a lot are patents and employees. And so right now they've got, and those numbers might be a little dated because we originally made this presentation a month ago, but they have about 240 employees per LinkedIn and they've got 111 job postings. So they're relatively sized for a startup and they are expanding rapidly. And most of the people they're hiring are manufacturing, facility, operations, procurement, and technical, which means they're literally de facto means they are building their production facility, ramping it, and making it work. That's what you hire those types of people for. They also have a very large number of patents, which seem pretty well situated to cover most of the things they're doing, which we like to see as well. So
yeah,
the way 3.5.
I was gonna say the way we gauge success of the company a lot is in this slide, looking at their employees and jobs. If you're hiring aggressively and you have a lot of patents being published, you're usually doing well. If you have a lot of money coming in, but you're not hiring aggressively and you're hiring a lot of like battery scientists and you're not hiring process engineers and operations and logistics based people, usually you can kind of suss that like the technology is still stuck and you're like, well, if they need a lot of scientists, they're probably
still doing R&D.
Yeah, they're probably not out of R&D. But if they're like, hey, I need an operations manager, you're like, they kind of figured it out. They're doing well. So that's
when it's
really
like
how we
3
grade.
operations managers and like 4 procurement people. Okay, they're buying supplies in bulk. Got it. All right. So we gave them a 3.5. They're still at the, sort of the bottom of the valley, in the valley of death, but they're kind of doing this right now and pivoting to start going back up. So very excited to see what they do in the next year or two, or 3 or 4, depending how long their runway goes from their cash waterfall perspective. So we talked about this a little bit already, but basically what they're doing is they're doing an iron air rust battery in a flow system, and they're going from metallic iron to rust and back through charge and discharge. And this is sort of one of the problems for what they're doing and why they're having to hire so many people. Is this is not a drop and play system. You can't just copy someone else's pilot or manufacturing line, buy the equipment and set it up in 9 months. You basically have to set it up all yourself. And so it's pretty hard to do. The materials are cheap. The material production is cheap. The processing is somewhat understood, but as you can see here, this is not a traditional lithium ion battery that they're making here. That's sort of the production speeds necessary for gigawatt scale are pretty well understood, even though there's a lot of tweaks in the different cell types. But they're still doing a pretty clearly manual assembly now and scaling towards automated. But these are just a very different system, and so there is some engineering into the box problems for them doing this. We think it's neutral. We think it's doable, but it's not something that makes their life easier, which is why we gave them a 2.5.
Yeah. To give some additional context, right? Flow batteries have been around since 1970 with NASA's first work introduced on it. So NASA started in the 70s with, I believe it was actually vanadium redox flow batteries. They kind of focused more on the technology over the next 10 years, and then actually Japan took it over, looking at actually the iron system. The pure iron flow battery. So it's not like they have a huge hurdle in terms of the fittings don't exist. They have to make new equipment. There hasn't been manifolds that haven't been made for flow batteries. Specifically, their challenge really comes from the box is just the system components itself and how it reacts with its environment, right? So a good example of this is, say you have this really fancy electrolyte that you love. You've made it in glass vials all your life. It makes your cell that's made out of all stainless steel hard components and metals run thousands of cycles. You run into the issue of, hey, does it kill the gaskets inside my system? And especially in redox flow batteries, where they're reliant on pumps to basically manage the energy density and power density of the cell based on how much active material they flow between the bipolar plate and then the cathode. You basically, all of those components are going to be challenges for them because there's a reason why iron rust is not in industry right now. There is probably going to be some issue associated with either the pump needs some sort of specialized Teflon, dry or something like that to help make it work, or they have some issue associated with just housing reactivity within the system and how things get or how things interact with the byproducts of the system and how they tend to work with it, right? I think in these, they have to, this probably goes to the next slide, but they have to deal with pH problems. So the big issue with iron, just so everyone knows, is there's essentially 2 major ones. There's essentially hydrogen evolution reactions that take place because you're inside of an aqueous system. The iron rust battery operates at a nominal voltage of about 1.22 volts. So that puts you at a pretty low power. And then you're also in a pretty low operating window as well. You're negative 0.44 to positive 0.7, I think, across if you did the whole working electrode, counter electrode, reference electrode. So the problem is as you get to that 1.22 area, you start to get hydrogen evolution from breakdown of your aqueous electrolyte. And that starts to form on the electrodes themselves. Once that starts forming on the electrodes themselves, the active material within it, or in this case, the rust, starts preferentially depositing in spots because you can't put an ion or a charge through a gas pocket. So you start getting preferential deposition. You actually get dendritic issues inside these iron batteries. So the way they try to combat that is by altering the pH, but as they alter the pH of the battery, what then ends up happening is you start degrading your activated carbon electrodes that you use and rely on trying to get charge out of the system. So their biggest pain point right now is just fighting the chemistry itself, right? So they have all these things on what can they put these electrolytes in. So they're in this challenging spot where they are going to be tuning their electrolyte, which will be reactive to everything they put inside this material system and casing. And they will have to make sure their system is tolerant to those electrolyte changes, right? And that's not so easily said, right? Usually when you scale something up in industry, you get a very known composition with a very known set of materials. And your only concern is that. But imagine someone's moving the target on the left and the right side is trying to have a tolerance window that says, hey, we can handle a certain degree of change, but once you go outside of this, you're going to start breaking things. So it's going to be this weird dance for them from a Painpoints perspective of how can they tune the system to get it to operate at its maximum efficiency, not degrade, not deal with all these chemistry problems, but also make sure at the same time they're figuring out the right components to build these things out of that don't negatively interact as well. And that's going to be their real pain point, is that dance. Because as they fix the chemistry now, like we said, they're hiring a lot of process. So it looks like from the outset that they are in the positive direction. But the fact that they don't have, at least to the best of our knowledge, a ton of these in the wild still speaks to the fact that there's probably some limiting factor that they haven't gotten over. And my guess it's that what are you building, like a known spec sheet of materials to build by, while also still trying to tweak their electrolyte at the same time. And I have a feeling that is the dance they're playing right now.
Mm-hmm. A lot of their patents speak to things basically on the filtering processes, the deoxidation, and also specialized electrolyte that help sort of solve these problems, prevent their dendrites, deal with the iron impurity issues, so they're able to use things like redox mediators to kind of balance out the reactions in the system. The other big pain point is that just in general, iron air has very low efficiency, so you get less energy back from the system than you put into it. And then also it has fairly low charge and discharge. And you can kind of see this pretty clearly in how they sort of advertise it, which is that it pairs well with other battery chemistries in a renewable energy storage situation where you have cheap to free power. It's okay. So it's okay if you lose it when you store it. And then you have other battery systems that can do the faster charge and discharge rates that you need from a load balancing perspective for a larger system.
Yep.
Okay. So we gave them a 3 out of 5 for this. We think it's overcomable, but there's definitely some difficulties there.
Yeah. As far as matching tech to market, they are, I would say, spot on. They're grid. They've said they are grid. You're never putting a flow battery in a car. You're never putting a flow battery in a cell phone. They've completely hit the correct market. Like, they aren't trying to hide it. They're doing everything correctly, which is like, hey guys, we're a grid battery company. That's what we do. That's what we expect to do. We're not trying to silver bullet everything else.
Mm-hmm. They're even releasing, they have an online resource that you can use to actually plan how their battery would normally work in a grid storage system or renewable system. So that they're going all in on that. And we think that's really good. Like, we almost gave them a 5. We only gave them a 4.5 just because they're still kind of doing it. They haven't succeeded yet, but we think they're absolutely doing everything right from a tech matching perspective. This is one of their slides from a presentation they gave at Stanford. I believe this is still a few years old, and I would really like to see the cell data that matches to where they can actually get to that point. But even if it's a little bit higher, you can see over here previously the other, oxygen iron batteries and things like that, which are a similar cost perspective as what they're doing. They're still very low compared to everything else. So we think they're matching it correctly. Obviously this is a cost play. They're using, cheap, abundant materials, which allows them to basically actually get into grid storage, unlike a lot of the other technologies that talk about getting into it. So yeah, very, very good tech matching for them. Okay, I guess I'll get this. So for them, we actually had a lot of trouble finding any cell data. Even in their own presentations, they will give kind of theoretical or sort of estimated numbers, but I think because they're still kind of figuring out what they're going to do from a product perspective, there's no product yet, so there's no product specs yet, and there's no cell data yet. So that's the biggest thing that we wanted to see and why we graded them a little bit more poorly. So there's no valid cell cycling conditions. There's no reproducible data sets. If they have them, we're saying here, maybe, I don't know, just because we don't have access to them. And so somebody invested $240 million, so they have to have something, but we just can't see any of it. It's not public right now.
Yeah, they're playing it close to the chest, which isn't a bad thing. You see some of this similar play with like Scylla. Scylla is another one that doesn't like to release cell cycling conditions. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that they've never felt the need to like flaunt it in the public eye. So we just gave them an I don't know. As far as like overhyped, we said they're not overhyped. We were like, yeah, they were doing everything correctly, kind of low under the radar, doing things well, really focused on themselves, right? There's probably one big company I know that we could probably unknow, starts with a Q and ends with an S. That tends to go on the hype train a little much, but I think they're pretty well reasonably set expectations for the greater audience. As far as reproducibility goes, circles back to one. There's just no cell data, so we had to give it an I don't know. There's nothing we can do with that. As far as 4 and 5, which is uses total cell weight and then not quietly changing procedure, we said, yeah, they're standard, right? They haven't published data for cell sets, and they've constantly stuck by that we're doing iron flow. They haven't pivoted. They haven't changed their story. They've been very consistent. As far as 6 goes, as far as ratios and stuff, it's not really applicable. Flow batteries are unique in the sense that the volume of electrolyte or catholyte and analyte that you have in your tank is basically dictated by what the available space is of the place. The more you can hold in your tanks, the more energy you can get. So they're kind of immune from this one, in all honesty. Quotes and cost of raw materials, we don't know. This is always a tricky one with who are they buying from, who is their supplier, where do they procure, what is the future going to look like? Does iron suddenly become expensive? They haven't really set groundworks or numbers for expectations on per unit cost labor. For all we know, they could be paying $1 million per kilowatt hour just because they have like 60 PhDs stuck in a room and they take the hourly weight of the PhDs to make the thing. So, we don't really know, but there's a lot of situations out there. Unfortunately, they did compare themselves to Panasonic. If you remember the last slide, Panasonic is in here, and they did compare themselves to Panasonic. So, I mean, it doesn't really apply, but they did.
We let them slide on that one because they are giving everything over time. But per raw rules as written, they compared themselves to Panasonic. 1970 to 2005.
As far as relying on substance over marketing, we haven't seen a lot of data. So this is this I don't know category where, like, if I were a battery engineer, I'd be asking, or I am one, if I were in front of them as an investor, if I were in Catherine's position, I'd be asking some very tough questions and asking for some very big data sets and being like, produce it for me right now, before I even threw window or any kind of money through the window over there. But I think we got 8 minutes left, so we're going to move on to our next energy. So our next energy is relatively new. They have about 90 million in funding, but for this size company, I think that's adequate. They're not trying to invent a chemistry. They're not trying to create a pilot line, right? This is a lot of bare bones mechanical, thermal, and electrical engineering that they're doing. So their cost basis is going to be much lower from a capital point of view. So total funding is great at 90 million. I like to see their key investors. Usually Bill Gates is a good sign that the company is going to do well. Billionaires don't throw money at things publicly and back them publicly unless they feel pretty confident. Usually the rich like to get richer, not poorer. So seeing Bill Gates there is a good thing. And then also seeing BMW is a really good one. The business plan right now is they want to disrupt kind of the tier 1 OEM death stranglehold on the like manufacturing line. So they want to make sure that like they can get themselves in there. Now it's going to be a question of whether they get bought or they license or something like that. But the whole plan is to disrupt pack technology. As far as the value proposition, it comes from this approach, which you don't see in a lot of automotive OEMs. Everybody sticks to like one cell that fits all kind of shoe footprint. And they're not doing that. They're going completely hybrid, which I'm a big fan of. And then as far as employees go, they're at 102, but considering they're looking for a 10% bump over their current employee base, I think they're doing relatively well. This might be a look towards, more of a steady state. As far as heavy on cell manufacturing and thermal industrial engineers, this is kind of within expectations of the data that they've released, right? They need to source cell designs, which is not easy. They need to figure out thermals because they're putting 2 different chemistries next to each other. So that's going to be a problem. And then as far as industrial engineers, they need to figure out the whole mounting and the harnesses and everything else and how to do it in a clean and efficient manner. Patents wise, they're relatively light, but I think this is probably an area where patents would be harder to come by, more so than others due to the amount of players that are currently in the field.
Mm-hmm. Also, typically for things like this, it's more of a how you do it, how you balance. And so from a software, patent versus know-how versus just how you've done it perspective, it's a little hard to capture, software and the sort of final engineering of how they're putting the packs together.
Yeah. Going on though, as far as engineering into the box, guys, they're doing great. Packs are pretty standard. You can see here we got 2 of their packs kind of listed. You have their 1 Aries pack. The cool thing is, so when we talk packs, just general overview, what you really want to care about is your pack efficiency. So how efficient do you take if a cell is 100%, and that is 100% of it, what does the pack take on the weight? So their pack efficiency is actually 76%, which is relatively high. Usually you get a little bit high, more of a hit on your pack efficiency. From this though, we can see they're going prismatics, and I think the real engineering into the box difficulty that they'll have is not so much from are they using the correct mechanicals and stuff. It's going to be setting up and getting validation from the pre-existing, right? There isn't a lot of pack companies, or there is for aerospace, but they're usually built around government contracts for a very specific design, right? Whereas this is going to be a free-form design. So they're going to have to find an industry that wants these specifications that they've either pre-built, or they're going to have to convince an industry to adopt what they believe to be the best standpoint. And that's one of their challenges. We gave them a 4 because, relatively speaking, they're not making a paradigm shift. There's nothing here fundamentally I'm seeing that goes wrong. As far as pain points, I'll get into that later. But as far as an engineering into the box, they're scoring high. This isn't something where I have strong fears of, oh my goodness, like they figured out the science and now they got to figure out how to like completely scale it up. This is nice and straightforward.
Yep. Buy what looks like CATL LFP cells there on the right, put them in a pack, balance them correctly with other stuff, fit the whole pack to get into a market, cell pack, right?
Yeah. As far as pain points go, they run a split. So my biggest issue with their pain points are 1, corrosion. So different cells chemistries heat differently under different loads. So from an initial onset point, just balancing the thermal management in the pack is going to be incredibly challenging. You're going to have hot things next to cooler things, vice versa, especially as they're trying to get more dense, right? The whole thing about these things is get more dense, get out all the stuff, be more efficient. The second problem that comes with that is a lot of the corrosive effects that actually come into packs. So Luke will harp on this, but corrosion's huge, and heat usually accelerates corrosion. So you're going to have 2 different thermal regimes operating, and you're going to try and remove that heat. You're probably going to have corrosion delta or differential corrosion across the pack itself. So they're going to have a lot of pain points when it comes to just thermal management and how that acts with the ambient environment, whether that be Utah salted snow roads or perfect California weather. The last thing I think is really going to be a big pain point that they're going to have to overcome is actually their BMS. Combining technologies is incredibly difficult, especially when those technologies have different voltage windows. So managing your BMS is going to be of critical importance for getting their technology actually into a world where it becomes adopted, because usually the more nannies from a BMS you have in play, the less pack efficiency you deal with. So I mean, I know they got 700 miles of range on one thing, but that could be one cycle and they blew the pack out of the water. That could be a pack that goes several cycles, but I think they're going to have real troubles balancing technologies because they're going to have to source from different vendors. And not all cells have the same potentials. Not all cells are built exactly the same. If they got to source their energy cells from both LG and Samsung, or sorry, yeah, LG and like Panasonic, for example, right? They're not going to be identical. There's going to be slight nuances, and that pack BMS is going to become even more critical as they start to supply and source from different vendors.
The other thing with their pain points is, they're trying to basically jump in between the automotive and pack and cell makers as being sort of the assembler and sort of, again, the pack people who control sort of the value chain. And so they're going to be kind of competing with, in some ways, their customers and their suppliers. And I think that is a big pain point. And that's one of the main reasons we kind of gave them not as high of a grade, is that they really have to do a good job of relationships and supply agreements and getting their stuff to fit into somebody else's system seamlessly to be able to put themselves where they want to be in the market.
Yeah.
And that'll lead us directly to the next piece,
which is, do they match? Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we gave them a high score. They're, yeah, not really much to comment here. They kind of nailed this one, kind of like form. They are what they say they are. They are doing what they try to do. So there's nothing really there for us to comment on too much.
Yeah, we gave them, this is something sort of new we did, which we haven't done before, but we gave them a -1 at the end of what they're actually doing, just because what they're actually doing is they're competing with all the tier 1 battery makers and pack makers and car companies to kind of insert themselves in there. And I think that's really hard. Once they've done it, once they've been adopted, once they prove the value of their system, I think that's a different story, but getting in there in the first place, I think is going to be really hard for them.
As far as our next energy goes in terms of valid cell cycling conditions, we don't know. Similar to Form Energy, they're playing this one close to the chest. They're not releasing a lot of data, but we haven't seen anything negative or positive, so we're going to give them an I don't know at this standpoint, just because we would love to see data, but we also can't penalize a company for not showing data. As far as overhyped goes, I don't think so. I mean, they had the whole hype. They made a Tesla drive 700 miles, and they did that. I don't think that's overhyping. I think that's more of a proof of concept that they can show the greater world and say, hey, we drove a car 700 miles. Now, I would have loved the 15-hour YouTube video that would have been associated with that, where there was a little dash-mounted camera and everybody could sit there and enjoy the entire 15-hour ride or whatever it was. But that wasn't available. But I think in the future, if they did that, that'd be super cool, because it's just another proof point to their technology. Similar to number 1, there's no reproducible data sets that we can find, so we're going to give them an I don't know. The cool thing, though, is on number 4, they do actually list out all their energies and components and weights and everything, and I've actually done the hard math on it, and they are accurate towards those values. So they aren't using little cheats here and there in their cell energy weights. They're actually telling you what the entire pack is, efficiency-wise and energy-wise. This one's a little hard, though. They're a pack company, so of course they're going to change some of the layouts. It's not going to be chemistry related. It will most likely be thermal or wiring or structural, but they're not changing.
If it is chemistry, they'll be buying different cells from people, not changing the components themselves.
And there's probably going to be a lot of transparency associated with this, especially if you're going to be a customer. Customers like consistency. So we gave them a yes, because they're not going to be able to do it quietly, and they aren't doing it quietly. They're pretty transparent about what each pack does. Loadings and stuff, that's not a game here. It doesn't really apply to them. So we gave it an NA. And as far as costs go, they haven't been completely honest with costs, and it's kind of understandable, right? They have to secure a manufacturer. Do you target what you expect you'll be procuring and buying, or do you target what you're doing right now? I don't think they have a firm grasp on that yet, so we're going to give that one an I don't know. They aren't going to compare to Panasonic. Their best competitors would be like a Romeo Power or a tier 1 or an OEM. And right now that just gets an NA. As far as substance, yeah, they drove a Tesla 700 miles. Do I wish there was a YouTube video? Yes, but I mean, that's pretty good substance if you ask me, that they drove a Tesla. The fact that they put it in a Tesla is cool upon itself as well, right? That's a true showing your product in application kind of moment. So we give them a 5. We've long since talked about how we want to see hybrid packs. We've long since talked that people need to start thinking outside the box with battery technologies and not trying to shoehorn one technology into just one specific application. I think our next energy is going to be the catalyst for people looking at like silicon NMC hybrids, or sulfur NMC hybrids, or maybe if we get into like lithium air at some point, right? This hybrid pack is what's going to enable that, because everybody always wants energy and power density. This gives you both without having to sacrifice on the actual cell itself.
And then here's the summary at the end. So comparing them sort of side by side, surviving valley of death, 3.5 versus 3, they're both sort of on their way to the bottom or at the bottom of the valley and starting to work their way back up. And so very excited to see how they go forward. Their funding their people, their patents, and their pathways all seem pretty good to us. So that's why we gave them sort of above average for those. We're excited to see how they perform over the next couple of years. Again, engineering into the box. Form has a lot of trouble ahead, and Arnex Energy is kind of sort of skipping it by buying cells and then doing an integration themselves. From Painpoints, they both are above average, but still have some pain. For Form, it's the chemistry and the how they do it at scale. For our next, it's the fact that they're competing with their customers. And then tech matching. I think that actually needs to be fixed. But for Form Energy, their tech matching is very good. And if I go back a slide. Oh, right, we dinged them for the competing with their customers. But yeah, Arnex Energy does have very good tech matching. It's just from the perspective of how they're actually going to be able to get it to the market. And then we really like both of them. That's why we picked them as companies. Sometimes we go over stuff that we think is popular or that have been in the news or successful, and so we don't always necessarily love the companies we're reviewing. And sometimes as we review them, we find out that we don't like what they're doing or how they position themselves, or what they're saying they're doing versus what it looks like they're doing, and if they're kind of playing some sneaky stuff. But we really enjoyed reviewing both of these, and we hope you guys enjoyed learning about them.
Thank you all. And before we get into the questions, I'm going to stop the recording.